Hey guys, tonight we drift back thousands of years to the muddy banks of the Nile to find out whether you could survive a single brutal day in ancient Egypt. It's a place we remember for pyramids, pharaohs, and gods who kept a watchful eye on everything. But underneath the gilded masks and towering temples sat a far rougher way of life. So before we go any further, feel free to like the video and subscribe, though only if you truly enjoy the stories I tell here. And drop a note in the comments telling me where in the world you're listening from and what time it is where you are. I always love seeing how many corners of the globe end up gathered here together. So, welcome to ancient Egypt, a land of pyramids, gods, and relentless ultraviolet punishment. Before your eyes are even open, sunlight is already pouring through the gaps in your reed hut as if it's auditioning for the part of a merciless sky god. No curtains, no shutters, and certainly no air conditioning, just the flat, roasting heat of the desert cooking everything in reach, yourself included, well before breakfast. You're stretched out on a straw mat under a linen sheet that offers more suggestion than shelter. That gentle Nile breeze the travel documentaries kept promising, long gone. It probably expired somewhere around 2800 BC. By the time you shuffle outside, the thermometer is already brushing 90 degrees Fahrenheit, roughly 32 Celsius, and it isn't even mid-morning yet. Here the sun doesn't merely shine, it assaults you. Your linen tunic is useless, about as protective as wearing tissue paper inside a sauna. And forget sunscreen. There's no aloe, no SPF 50, not even a floppy hat stitched with some beach resort's logo. The Egyptians did have protective oils, but unless you're wealthy or attached to a temple, none of it is coming your way. Your realistic option is to smear yourself in mud or crocodile dung, which supposedly might keep you from bursting into flame. Emphasis firmly on might. By noon, the paving stones underfoot are hot enough to cook lentils. Shade is a genuine luxury since trees are scarce. You might steal a little relief crouched behind a mud brick wall, though by now even the wall is sweating. As for you, you resemble something tossed into a clay oven by a baker who forgot to set the timer. And keep your grumbling to yourself because Ra, the sun god, is watching. In Egypt, the sun wasn't just weather, it was divine authority. The fiercer the day, the more powerful Ra was feeling. So if you happen to be melting, take it as a spiritual compliment. In short, lasting one day here demands water, humility, and an iron tolerance for feeling like a slowly roasting chicken. And remember, this is only the morning. Once you're finally upright, or at least off that scratchy mat, there's good news, the Nile is only a short stroll away. The bad news is that you'll smell it long before you spot it. Yes, the mighty Nile, giver of life, held sacred. The very reason a civilization exists here at all. But let's be honest, it also smells like a fish market went through an ugly divorce with a swamp. The banks hum with flies, frogs, and various creatures that really shouldn't have legs yet somehow do. All the same, this is where you bathe. Soap hasn't been invented, and even if it had, you couldn't afford it. Instead, you scrub down with the cutting-edge cleaning technology of the age. Sand. That's right, exfoliation the Egyptian way. Just grind coarse grit against your skin and call it a beauty routine. It's nature's sandpaper, only less effective. Laundry happens in the river too, and by laundry, we mean beating your clothes against the rocks while praying a crocodile doesn't mistake them for a midday snack. And to make it all the more delightful, don't overlook the odd bit of sewage drifting down from upstream. People, livestock, and the occasional funeral boat all share this water, yet somehow this counts as clean. You scrub, you rinse, and you climb out feeling marginally less sticky and only mildly more anxious about leeches. If you happen to live in a city like Memphis or Thebes, you might be fortunate enough to use a public basin or cistern, but for everyone else it's the Nile or nothing. And privacy isn't part of the deal. This is a shared bathing spot, crowded with families, neighbours, animals, and the occasional ibis pecking near your ankles like it's paying rent. Water jars get filled and balanced on heads, then hauled back to your mud brick house before the noon heat bakes the clay solid. It's a daily rite, sacred, essential, and just a touch traumatic. So yes, the Nile is holy. It feeds you, washes you, and quenches your thirst. But let's not pretend it's some sparkling oasis. In truth, it's part miracle, part biohazard, and all you've got. By now you've bathed in the crocodile-infested Nile, sanded yourself semi-clean, and your body feels like a baked fig. Time for breakfast, the most important and least glamorous meal of your Egyptian day. Let's manage expectations. There's no eggs, Benedict, no fruit bowl, and absolutely no iced latte. Breakfast here is less a culinary occasion and more a tactical refueling stop. You perch on a low stool if you own one, or you simply squat in the corner like everybody else. The star of the plate is bread, and plenty of it. Dense, coarse, and often as chewy as a leather sandal, it's made from ima wheat or barley and baked in clay ovens that may or may not be shared with the local rats. Don't be startled to find sand in your slice either, not as a garnish, but as an uninvited guest from the grinding stones. A daily serving of minerals, you might say. Then comes the beer, though don't get excited. This isn't a crisp, bubbly craft ale. It's thick, cloudy, lukewarm liquid bread, closer to porridge than to a proper pint. It's dense with calories and only vaguely fermented, a kind of ancient smoothie carrying the faint tang of sour cereal and survival. Even the children drink it, not to be daring, but because it's safer than water. At least the brewing boils out the parasites, unlike the Nile, which, as we've established, is basically a petri dish. If you're lucky, and we mean genuinely lucky, you might score an onion or a handful of dried dates to go with your carbohydrate slab. Protein only shows up if someone caught a fish and resisted eating it raw on the spot. And as you gnaw your rock-hard loaf and sip your grain sludge, flies swarm around you as though it's a buffet, because to them it is. You swat with one hand, cradle your cup in the other, and try not to dwell too long on the fact that this is probably the finest meal you'll get all day. Breakfast in Egypt isn't about flavour, it's about function, giving your body just enough fuel to last until someone hands you another sand-flecked brick of bread. Bon appétit! You've had your gritty loaf, your chunky beer, and just enough rest to pass for functional. Now it's time to work, and believe me, ancient Egyptian labour makes modern burnout look like a day at the spa. Unless you're a scribe, a priest, or royalty, which, let's be honest, you're not, your job is nothing but muscle and dust. No air-conditioned cubicle, no coffee breaks, no ergonomic chair, just sweat, grit, and the ever-present chance of collapsing before noon. If you're a farmer, you'll be ankle-deep in Nile mud by sunrise, tearing out weeds or planting barley beneath an overseer whose favourite pastime appears to be shouting. You work with wooden ploughs, crude sickles, and your bare hands. If your back aches, congratulations, that means it's doing its job. If you're a labourer, things turn even more biblical. Picture dragging multi-ton stones for a temple under a blazing sun, barefoot, up ramps built from gravel and prayer. There are no safety measures here. You trip, and that's a broken ankle and a shrug from the foreman. Working on tombs is a whole other level of misery, You're pounding limestone and chiseling out burial chambers for people who get to rest far longer than you ever will. And if you botch a pharaoh's tomb, let's just say job security might come in the form of a sealed room and a curse. And if you're a woman, don't imagine you're spared. Domestic work is physical labour too, grinding grain, hauling water, weaving linen, minding children, and still lending a hand in the fields. Your break is whenever the baby manages to nap for 7 whole minutes. You eat on your feet while cooking dinner. Wipe the sweat with your tunic and keep moving, because slowing down means falling behind. And falling behind means someone else claims your grain quota while you take the blame. There's no clocking out. The sun is your supervisor, and when it finally slips below the horizon, you crawl home half alive, caked in dust, dreaming of softer sandals and a less aggressive sun god. Work in Egypt isn't merely hard, it's endless. A full-body commitment to survival that repeats day after day until your body gives out or your overseer decides you're no longer worth feeding. And that isn't even the worst of it. After pouring your soul into the fields or the quarry, you might feel tempted to mutter something. Nothing much, maybe a small, "This job stinks," or a "Why am I doing this again?" Stop right there. In ancient Egypt, complaining isn't simply frowned upon, it edges toward treason. Why? Because your boss isn't just a ruler, he's an actual god. The pharaoh isn't some fellow who got elected or lucked into the right family. He's the living embodiment of Horus, son of Ra, chosen by the heavens to rule Egypt and hold Ma'at, the divine cosmic order, in place. Put another way, if the river floods generously this year, thank the pharaoh. If it doesn't, well, perhaps you simply didn't pray hard enough. Doubting his authority isn't just rude, it's blasphemy. Speaking against him could earn you an appointment with a whip, a set of shackles, or an early trip to the underworld without any of your favorite burial goods. His face is everywhere, on statues, temple walls, coins, even the molds for shaping bread. His name is chanted in rituals, and his image is always painted larger than anyone else's across every mural. That's not artistic flattery, that's the law. And don't count on ever laying eyes on him. As a commoner, the closest you'll come is glimpsing a golden barge drifting past during a religious festival. Blink and it's gone, carrying him back to a palace you'll never step inside, surrounded by officials, guards, scribes, and enough gold to bankroll a small civilization, which, fun fact, he essentially does. If you're fortunate enough to be assigned to a royal project, say a tomb, a temple, or a statue the size of a mountain, you labor with divine joy. At least, that's what the state insists. And you insist on it too, because pretending you're honored to carve stone for 14 hours a day is far safer than the alternative. And don't even flirt with the idea of rebellion. Pharaohs stamp out uprisings faster than you can say dynasty. Just ask the last village that tried holding back its taxes. Oh wait, you can't. It doesn't exist anymore. So yes, the pharaoh is divine. And you? You're simply lucky to be permitted to sweat in his name. If you assumed the sun was the hardest part of ancient Egypt, wait until it dawns on you that here, sand is your roommate, your co-worker, your seasoning, and your sworn enemy all at once. It gets everywhere, into your clothing, your bedding, your meals. There is simply no getting away from it. You might be laboring, praying, dozing, or quietly browsing the market when a blast of hot wind rolls through and turns your face into an exfoliating treatment nobody asked for. Start with what you wear. Linen. Light, breathable, and about as good at blocking sand as a screen door is at holding back soup. It slits under your tunic, sticks to your skin, and works its way into folds you didn't know you had. Eating is its own trial. Every loaf is essentially a sand trap. Because flour was ground between stone slabs, fine grit ended up baked right into the dough. Egyptians weren't only eating their wheat, they were eating a little of the millstone with every bite. That is why ancient teeth are so often found worn flat, smooth as river stones. Picture chewing your breakfast while simultaneously filing down your molars. And if you imagine home is a sand-free refuge, think again. Your mud brick house has gaps, cracks, and window openings with no glass, perfect doorways for wind-driven grit. Your floors are dusted with it. Your cooking pots hold it. Your bed is basically a sandpit dressed up as furniture. Footwear is optional at best. Most Egyptians went barefoot, always one stride from turning their soles into weathered leather. If you do own shoes, they are a simple pair of sandals woven from reeds, stylish perhaps, protective not remotely. Then there are the sandstorms, Egypt's version of a slap from the gods. One moment you are chatting with a neighbour, the next you are spitting dust and feeling as though someone emptied a whole beach into your eye sockets. Visibility falls to nothing, and everyone around you dissolves into coughing silhouettes. In short, sand is the roommate who never moves out, the spice in every dish, and the quiet foe of your eyes, lungs, and dignity. It isn't merely the backdrop of your life. By now it is part of your body, and no, you can't rinse it away. You already tried in the Nile, which is probably carrying even more of it. In ancient Egypt, religion isn't a weekend pastime. It is the operating system running everything. Your work, your diet, your washing, your bedtime habits, all of it steered by gods who seem to hold very particular opinions. First, understand that the gods are everywhere. Your town holds temples to a dozen different deities, each in charge of some essential piece of the world. There's Ra, who steers the sun across the heavens like a divine ferryman. Thoth, the ibis-headed god of wisdom, oversees scribes and the lunar calendar. Sobek, part crocodile and part nightmare fuel, guards the Nile. And Bastet, the cat goddess, more or less handles public relations. Forget personal freedom. Your day is organized around keeping them content. Wake and thank Ra. Pour out a little beer and apologize to Hathor. Stub your toe and curse under your breath, lest you draw the attention of a spirit holding a grudge. Before meals, you set aside a portion of food for the gods. Before sleep, you pray that Set, god of chaos, doesn't rearrange your household into disorder overnight. Even funerals stretch across days, the dead expected to pass tests, dodge demons, and prove they were decent people, or risk being erased entirely. Which brings us to the afterlife, a matter Egyptians took with deadly seriousness. You don't simply die and move along. You face a judgment in which your heart is weighed against a feather of truth. If lies, cruelty, or perhaps the theft of a neighbour's goat have made it heavy, you are devoured by Amet, a creature with the head of a crocodile, the body of a lion, and the legs of your worst nightmare. So even in death, you remain on probation. Here's the twist though. This elaborate belief system isn't gloomy. It is reassuring. Egyptians saw life as one part of a cosmic balance, and if you kept the rituals and upheld Marat, the principle of truth and order, you had a real shot at a peaceful eternity, complete with food, family, and maybe a boat. Naturally, the wealthier you were, the more the gods seemed to notice you. Temples were vast, priests were powerful, and the peasants, well, they simply hoped the gods felt generous that day. Because here, faith isn't optional. It is your job description, your insurance policy, and your travel itinerary for the next life. So, you've stepped on something sharp, been bitten by something strange, or caught something contagious, which in ancient Egypt is roughly a Tuesday. Time to seek medical care. Just don't picture a waiting room or anything sterile. You're about to be treated with a blend of spells, herbs, and pure optimism. You'll be brought to a doctor, and to their credit, Egyptian physicians were among the most advanced in the ancient world. They had surgical instruments, medical texts, and a fair grasp of anatomy. The catch is that Egyptian science always arrived wrapped in magic. You might be handed a poultice of honey, mouldy bread, and crushed herbs. Honey really is antibacterial, and the mold carries early penicillin-like properties, so it sort of works. But before it goes on, the healer will chant a protective spell just to be safe, because you never know when your stomach cramps are actually the doing of a spiteful ghost or an offended god. Headache. You may get crushed onions rubbed into your scalp while someone recites a hymn to Thoth. Chest trouble. Let's smear on some cow dung mixed with dates and see what happens. Eye infection. Abscesses were drained, bones were set, and wounds were setched with linen. But there is no anesthesia. Just a sharp blade and a friend pinning your shoulders while you scream into a mud brick pillow. Dentistry, not great. Remember all that sand in the bread? Your teeth are ground down by your 20s. If one becomes infected, your options are 1. Live with it, 2. Die from it, or 3. Have it pulled with something resembling pliers, forged by a blacksmith with low standards. And don't overlook the amulets. Whether you are giving birth, being stitched up, or merely sneezing too loudly, a good doctor-priest will likely hang a charm around your neck, just in case the true culprit is an invisible serpent spirit coiled around your spleen. So yes, Egyptian medicine had its moments, but mostly you better believe in the gods, because your bandage is quite literally a prayer. Here's a turn most people don't expect. Women in ancient Egypt held more rights than women in many later civilizations. They could own property, run businesses, file for divorce, and even haul a man into court. Sounds progressive, right? But before you pack for a time-traveling girl boss getaway, hold on, because while the legal standing may impress you, the everyday reality is far less glamorous. As a woman in ancient Egypt, you likely rise before sunrise. You grind grain by hand on a huge flat stone that chews through both wheat and your spine. Then you are off to haul water from the Nile, cook breakfast, mind the children, run the household, feed the animals, and, when needed, help in the fields. You are a one-woman workforce in linen. No me time, no spa days, and certainly no maternity leave. Childbirth is dangerous and painful. Midwives help, sure, but there are no epidurals, no disinfectant, and no soothing harp playlists. You deliver in a hot room thick with incense and prayer, hoping not to bleed too much. Let's talk fashion. Linen dresses are light and breathable, but there is no underwear and no shoes. The sun scorches your skin, the sand grinds into everything, and the insects treat you like an all-you-can-eat buffet. Want makeup? Egyptian women did wear cosmetics, but it is lead-based and applied with little sticks that look suspiciously like toothpicks. Now, if you are fortunate enough to be born into a wealthy family, life improves. You might read and write, manage estate accounts, or serve as a priestess. Born royal, you could even rule as pharaoh, like Hatshepsut or Cleopatra, who governed with brilliance and terrifying eyeliner. But if you are poor, your status may be legal while your reality is physical. You work, sweat, bend, carry, give birth, bury the dead, and pray. You are not chained by law so much as by survival. Still, Egyptian women had agency, and that mattered. They could speak in court, keep their inheritance, and didn't become property the moment they married. Set against many ancient societies, that is huge. So yes, Egyptian women had rights, but comfort was reserved for statues and goddesses, not the woman elbow-deep in dough while swatting flies off a toddler. You've made it through another brutal day in ancient Egypt. You ate your gritty bread, hauled your buckets, avoided divine wrath, and maybe even outran a sandstorm. Time to rest, surely? Not quite, because here the real examination begins after you die. Death isn't the finish line, it is the opening of an astonishingly bureaucratic, multi-phase journey through the underworld. And if you thought the labor overseer was strict, wait until you meet the gods of judgment. First, your soul travels to the hall of Ma'at. There, before a tribunal of 42 deities, you must declare your innocence in what amounts to the oldest legal deposition in history. You recite lines like, "I did not steal, I did not lie, I did not covet my neighbor's donkey," all while hoping the gods are buying it. Then comes the weighing of the heart. Your heart, believed to be the seat of the soul, is set on a scale opposite the feather of Marat, the symbol of truth, justice, and balance. If your heart tips heavier than the feather, well, that means you lived a wicked life. Enter Amit. Part lion, part crocodile, part hippo, all terror. She doesn't arrest you. She doesn't fine you. She eats your soul, destroying it forever. No afterlife, no second chances, only eternal non-existence, which in a culture obsessed with eternity is the ultimate punishment. And it goes further. You can doom yourself not only through your actions but through your words. One wrong confession, one forgotten line during the judgment, and boom, spiritual obliteration. It is like an open book test where failure means being swallowed by a mythological death hybrid. Pass, however, and congratulations. You enter the field of reeds, a serene, idealized version of Egypt where your soul lives on forever, with boats, with crops, with family, and presumably with fewer sand fleas. But the stakes are enormous. That is exactly why Egyptians obsessed over tomb preparation, funeral rites, and magical texts like the Book of the Dead, a spiritual cheat sheet packed with prayers, spells, and useful reminders like, "Don't insult the crocodile god." So yes, the afterlife may be beautiful, but only if you live your life very, very carefully. One curse word, one unpaid temple tax, and your next stop is lunch for Amit. If there is one small mercy in ancient Egypt, it is this: linen. Blessed, breathable linen. Your whole wardrobe, and everyone else's, is made from this plant-based cloth. It is light, cool, and it lets your skin breathe in the scorching heat. That was the good news. The bad news is that the comfort more or less stops there. Farmer, builder, priest, or market vendor, it hardly matters, because you're pulling on the same outfit every single morning. For men, that means a short white kilt or a simple loincloth. For women, a straight sleeveless dress of linen, sometimes cinched up with straps and sometimes not. Belong to the upper class, and you might get pleats, a few beads, or some elegant patterning. Everyone else makes do with plain white or a faint grey that darkens depending on how many days it's been since the last wash. And, yes, the wash. Laundry means scrubbing your clothes by hand in the Nile, while praying a hippopotamus doesn't surface halfway through the rinse. Most people simply go barefoot. Sandals woven from reeds or cut from leather are saved for festivals or set aside for temple priests. So unless you happen to be royalty, plan on spending your days with hot sand packed between your toes and the occasional sharp stone lodged in your heel. Accessories? Certainly, though most of them earn their keep. Amulets to keep you safe, necklaces to advertise your rank, and eye paint ground from powdered coal, which was never purely cosmetic. It cut the glare bouncing off the sun and was believed to hold off eye infections. Even eyeliner had a day job in ancient Egypt. But dress as sharply as you like, the insects couldn't care less. Flies, gnats, mosquitoes, all of them read your breezy little outfit as a personal welcome mat. You spend the day swatting without pause, smearing on perfumed oils, and hoping your linen doesn't cling to your skin like a soaked curtain the moment the heat peaks. Your wardrobe doesn't shift with the seasons either, mostly because Egypt doesn't really have seasons, only hot and marginally less hot. That linen ensemble is your uniform all year long, whether the day hits 110 degrees or cools to a bracing 70 in the evening. So yes, Egyptian clothing was light, graceful, and a good deal more comfortable than anything the Romans would drape themselves in centuries later. But don't let the airy fabrics deceive you, because no matter how weightless your tunic feels, your life remains heavy with labour, heat, sand, and bugs that flatly refuse to respect your personal space. You've made it through another scorching Egyptian day, hauling bricks, ducking sandstorms, and hoping your linen doesn't crumble apart mid-chore. But in ancient Egypt, survival is only ever alone. However tough you are, the odds say you won't see 35. Consider the math. If you clear childhood at all, which is no small feat given how brutally high infant mortality ran, you're shoved into adulthood by the age of 13. Marriage, work, and raising children all begin early, because frankly, the clock is against you. You might be taken by heat stroke, an infected cut, childbirth, a crocodile, a scorpion's sting, or a bad loaf of bread. And forget antibiotics. Run a fever, and your finest medicine is honey, herbs, and the hope that the gods have no other plans for your soul. Here's the turn, though. Egyptians weren't frightened of death. They prepared for it, arguably better than most people today prepare for retirement. If you're wealthy, you commission a tomb, the ancient equivalent of a 5-star suite for eternity. You begin stockpiling grave goods, jewelry, food offerings, perfumes, statues, even little servant figurines called shabtis to handle your chores in the next world. Picture them as spiritual interns labouring away while you rest forever. Your body is embalmed, wound in linen, packed with natron, a natural drying salt, and settled into a painted sarcophagus. You're sent off with a copy of the Book of the Dead, which reads less like a book of doom and more like a mystical travel guide, complete with passwords for the afterlife, spells to bewilder demons, and instructions for avoiding the soul-devouring monsters. If you're poor, your tomb is more likely a shallow scoop in the sand. Your body is wrapped in whatever cloth the family can part with, a pot or two set down beside you, and then earth heaped over the top. No murals, no golden mask, just you and the wind. Yet even the poorest Egyptians clung to the same dream of the afterlife, a calm and fertile paradise they called the Field of Reeds, where you farm without sweating, eat without hunger, and drift down the Nile forever beneath a gentle sun. So yes, you'll likely die young in ancient Egypt. But live well, pray properly, and avoid insulting too many jackal-headed gods, and you just might spend eternity in style. You finally reach the afterlife, or at least the inside of the tomb, embalmed, wrapped, blessed, and buried. Time to rest in peace, surely. Well, not quite, because in ancient Egypt even the dead get robbed. Start from a plain fact. Tombs are stuffed with valuable things. Gold amulets, jewelry, perfumed oils, carved statues, chests brimming with linen, and for pharaohs, whole shiploads of treasure, every bit of it meant to travel into the afterlife. But treasure sealed in a tomb is essentially an open invitation to anyone holding a chisel and a bad conscience. Tomb robbery grew so widespread that it became a permanent headache. Pharaohs fought back by burying their tombs deep in cliff faces, sealing them behind trapdoors and scratching blood-curdling curses across the walls. Lines like, "May a crocodile devour your soul," or "May your limbs be twisted forever by a serpent of fire." Spoiler, the curses didn't work. The robbers came regardless, by night, in secret, armed with inside knowledge. Some were locals. Some were the very workers, now corrupt, who had helped build the place. In certain cases, even priests and guards were quietly in on the scheme. But given how prized tomb goods were, especially the gold and the rare incense, the gamble usually looked worth it. The dead, after all, don't fight back. And it wasn't only the wealthy who were plundered. Even the graves of ordinary people were disturbed. A poorer Egyptian might be buried with nothing more than a small pot of beer or a loaf of bread for the road ahead, and that was still worth stealing. Food was scarce, tools were precious, and linen was as good as money. The irony is that tomb robbing wasn't always about greed. Sometimes it was about staying alive. Egypt weathered famines, political collapse, and invasions. A starving worker might break into a tomb, not for riches, but for a meal. And when your children are going hungry, a handful of funeral offerings starts to look less like sacred objects and more like dinner. So in ancient Egypt, being dead earns you no safety. Your tomb can be emptied, your name scraped away, and your mummy unwound by some desperate soul with a pickaxe and shaky morals. Rest in peace, but only if nobody knows where you're buried. We've all seen them, those grand and puzzling carvings running across the walls of temples and tombs. Birds, eyes, serpents, lotus blossoms, and figures walking sideways as though strutting down a runway. ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs. Gorgeous to look at and maddening to learn. They may look effortless, but try actually reading them. Hieroglyphs were never mere decoration. They formed a full writing system, more than 700 characters and steadily growing. Some symbols stand for whole words, others for sounds, and many are determinatives that pin down meaning, because apparently writing the word star with an actual picture of a star was simply too obvious. And don't hold out for spaces or punctuation. Ancient Egyptian text was essentially one long and lovely riddle, all artistic flourish, no vowels, and a bottomless need for context. It could also be written left to right to left, or top to bottom, depending on the scribe's mood that morning. The trick is to notice which way the birds or people are facing. That's your reading direction. Facing right, read from the right. Facing left, read from the left. Upside down, good luck. Learning to write this wasn't a pastime for commoners. Literacy was rare. Perhaps 1% of the population could genuinely read and write. If you wanted a place at that table, you had to train as a scribe, which meant years of grueling study begun in childhood. You'd commit hundreds of symbols to memory, copy out endless scrolls, and drill so relentlessly that your hand had probably cramped into a permanent claw by the age of 15. But the reward was enormous. Scribes were respected, well-fed, and never sent to haul bricks under the sun. Instead, they drafted tax records, court documents, letters, and religious texts. They were indispensable to society and shielded from most manual labor. In a world where writing was power, scribes ruled quietly from the shadows. For everyone else, writing carried a whiff of the magical, quite literally. Hieroglyphs were thought to hold sacred power. Write down a person's name and you preserved their soul. Erase it, and you erase them entirely, a total spiritual undoing. So yes, spelling genuinely mattered. Hieroglyphs may resemble ancient emoji, but they're closer to a linguistic Rubik's Cube wrapped in myth, math, and mystery. Beautiful? Absolutely. Easy to learn? Not remotely. After 14 chapters of heat, hunger, sand, superstition, and back-breaking labor, it's time for the big question. Could you survive a single day in ancient Egypt? Let's be honest, probably not. It's tempting to romanticize the ancient world. Golden tombs, air scented with lotus, elegant hieroglyphs, gods with animal heads, and a deep love of order and beauty. But behind the famous monuments and the stunning art lay a world of harsh realities that spared no one but the elite. The average Egyptian day opened on a dirt floor, a haze of flies, and the certainty that no work meant no food. You walked barefoot across blistering sand, hauled water, cooked over open flames, and lived elbow to elbow with insects, smoke, and livestock. You fretted over disease, divine punishment, and whether a snake might slip into your sleeping mat. There was no toothpaste, no medicine, no retirement plan, and if fortune smiled, maybe 2 changes of linen. You served a god-king who could seize your land with a single decree, endured a climate that roasted your skin by midday, and followed a religion that demanded you pass a literal divine exam after death just to enter the pleasant version of the afterlife. And let's not forget everything you didn't have. No antibiotics, no sunscreen, no privacy, no plumbing, no painkillers, and no easy way out. Once you were born into your class, that was the whole story. No promotions, no career changes, no journey of self-discovery. You were a scribe, a farmer, a laborer, a mother, a servant, or dead. And yet, for all of it, the Egyptians weren't a miserable people. They believed fervently in their gods, their purpose, and the beauty of being alive. They loved music, dancing, food, family, and festivals. They cracked jokes, they painted, and they pictured eternity so vividly that they raised stone monuments still standing today. But drop a modern person in there, stripped of air conditioning, filtered water, Advil, sneakers, and a smartphone, and they'd crumble before the second sandstorm rolled in. So no, you wouldn't last a day in ancient Egypt. But that's fine, because they lasted thousands of years. And maybe, just maybe, that's exactly why we're still talking about them. In the heart of ancient Teotihuacan, one pyramid refuses to fade from memory. Its surface is covered not with serene symbols of faith or gentle deities, but with snarling, open-mouthed stone serpents, dozens upon dozens of them. They thrust out from the temple's facade as if caught frozen in mid-strike, fangs exposed, eyes flung wide. This is the Temple of the Feathered Serpent, known to many as the Temple of Quetzalcoatl. But where most temples reach skyward in reverence, this one feels different. It feels predatory. From the instant you draw near, there's an unsettling sense of being watched. Those stone serpent heads were never simple ornament. They were warnings, emblems of divine wrath. And beneath their gaze, something horrific once took place. Digs carried out over the last few decades turned up something no archaeologist had anticipated. Beneath the temple's foundation lay more than the usual ceremonial gifts. There were human remains, and not just a scattered few. More than 200 bodies, a great many of them beheaded, their hands lashed behind their backs. Young men, perhaps warriors, laid to rest in clusters, ritual victims arranged with almost mathematical care. A few had obsidian knives set beside them. Others wore necklaces strung from human teeth or ornaments shaped from jawbones. They had not been tossed carelessly into the earth. Each one had been positioned on purpose, in poses that carried symbolic weight. This was plainly no ordinary mass grave. It was a statement, a bargain with the divine chiseled into stone and sealed with blood. Yet what sort of belief could excuse such a thing? Who called for so many lives to be spent all at once? The Temple of the Feathered Serpent was never merely a house of worship. It was a stage for power, a place where rulers braided together cosmology, warfare, and dread to keep their grip on a city of more than 100,000 people. And this ritual spilling of blood may have been the price of holding the cosmos steady. To stand before the temple today and study those stone serpents is to look at more than art or masonry. You are gazing into the face of a civilization convinced that the gods hungered for blood, and equally convinced it had every right to supply it. But who exactly were they? Who ordered such violence, then slipped away leaving no trace? The answer waits in the shadows of Teotihuacan. Long before the Aztec Empire rose, long before the Maya etched their cosmic calendar into stone, one city stood apart from anything else in the ancient Americas, Teotihuacan. The name came later from the Aztecs, and it means the place where the gods were born. Walk its vast avenue of the dead, lined with pyramids that seem to graze the sky, and the reasoning becomes clear. At its peak, somewhere between 100 and 250 CE, Teotihuacan sprawled across the valley with over 100,000 residents, ranking it among the largest cities anywhere on Earth, a match for Rome, Alexandria, and Chang'an in both scale and reach. Nothing about it was accidental. Broad avenues, gridded streets, apartment compounds sheltering extended families, multi-story buildings raised from volcanic stone. And anchoring the whole design, 3 enormous pyramids, the Pyramid of the Moon, the Pyramid of the Sun, and the Temple of the Feathered Serpent. Here is what sets Teotihuacan apart, though. No one knows who built it. Even now, we cannot name the people who raised this place. We do not know what they called themselves. There are no written records, no royal names cut into the walls. Teotihuacan appears to have been governed not by a lone king, but perhaps by a council, a theocracy, or some arrangement of power foreign to anything we recognize. And yet, despite that silence, its reach was immense. Traces of Teotihuacan's influence turn up hundreds of miles away, from the Maya cities of Tikal and Copan to the far-off Zapotec capital of Monte Alban. Obsidian blades, pottery styles, murals, even political interference. In one instance, envoys from Teotihuacan may have had a hand in toppling a local Maya king to seat a ruler friendlier to their aims. So how did they sustain such a far-flung web of power? How did a city with no known writing system exert authority across Mesoamerica? The answer likely lies in the way they wove cosmic belief into governance. Their temples were more than shrines. They were instruments of control, lined up precisely with movements in the heavens, staged as arenas for ritual killing, a constant reminder to every citizen and every stranger that Teotihuacan was no ordinary place. It was the pivot of the world, a sacred engine keeping time, fate, and blood moving together. And at its very center stood the Temple of the Feathered Serpent. To grasp the temple, you first have to understand the god it honored, the Feathered Serpent. Later known to the Aztecs as Quetzalcoatl, and to the Maya as Kukulkan, this figure is among the most puzzling deities in all of Mesoamerican myth. But at Teotihuacan, centuries before the Aztecs came to power, the feathered serpent was already a central and possibly supreme divine presence. And here lies the paradox. What kind of god is at once serpent and bird? Consider it. Snakes glide through the underworld, shedding their skin, standing for rebirth, duality, and death. Birds climb toward the sun, embodying freedom, divinity, and the life-giving wind. To fuse the two, the earth-bound with the sky-dwelling, death with life, chaos with order, was to conjure something wholly cosmic, something frighteningly potent. The feathered serpent was not simply a god. He was a bridge between worlds. Across the temple's facade, carved in deep relief, dozens of his likenesses appear. Bulging eyes, bared fangs, feathered headdresses. Some scholars read them as the god himself. Others think they depict warriors or priests dressed in divine finery to broadcast their rank. Whichever it is, they are everywhere. The building is smothered in these snake-bird hybrids, as though the stone itself were breathing with sacred life. But the feathered serpent did not belong to the heavens alone. He was bound up with sacrifice. Blood was the fuel that kept the cosmos turning, and Quetzalcoatl, though later remembered as a gentle, civilizing figure, played a far grimmer role at Teotihuacan. He asked for offerings, and not only maize or incense, but life itself. In certain myths, he ventured down into the underworld to gather the bones of the dead and fashion humankind. Yet drawing life from death required an exchange. The gods had given themselves up for humanity, and humans, in turn, were expected to repay in kind. The Temple of the Feathered Serpent was not merely a monument to faith. It was a cosmic engine built to bind sky, earth, and underworld together through ritual. Every block, every serpent head, every buried victim fed that machine. Teotihuacan did not simply worship the feathered serpent. Its people lived out his logic, paradox, power, and blood. And the most unsettling truths lay hidden below the surface. For centuries, the temple of the feathered serpent stood in silence, a worn and towering shape half devoured by time. Locals traded legends. Scholars offered theories. But no one could have pictured what lay under those layered stones, not until archaeologists finally cut through in the late 1980s and early 2000s. What emerged was not just surprising, it was disquieting. Below the temple's base ran a series of long, sealed chambers and pits, each packed with carefully arranged human remains. These were not the chaotic aftermath of war or plague. They were deliberate offerings, methodical, ritualized, cold. The victims, more than 200 of them, were young men, many between 15 and 25. Some wore necklaces made from human jawbones. Others had their hands bound behind them. A number had been decapitated. Obsidian knives, sharp and black as night, lay scattered close by, the plain tools of ritual killing. And it grows darker still. The bodies had been placed according to geometric and symbolic patterns. Nothing was random. They were set out in quadrants, aligned to the cardinal directions, perhaps to echo the shape of the cosmos. Even their number seems to have mattered. This was not death for its own sake. It was death made to mean something. Offerings ringed the victims, jaguar bones, serpents, exotic shells carried from the distant Gulf Coast, figurines and obsidian blades that had never seen a battlefield. This was not punishment. It was a gift. These young men, most likely warriors, had been chosen not to perish in shame, but to die as part of something transcendent. For the people of Teotihuacan, the very act of raising a temple may have demanded human sacrifice. It was as though every stone had to be sanctified with blood, every new layer set down only after an offering had been made. The deeper the digging went, the more sacrifice came to light. In one chamber, archaeologists found elaborate tunnels lined with mercury and mica, substances tied to the underworld. The floor shimmered like water. Was this a symbolic path to the land of the dead? A mirror of the night sky? The further they excavated, the more it felt as if the temple had not been built atop death, but constructed to enclose it. The blood had not stained the stone by chance. The stone was meant to keep the blood, and all of it belonged to the gods. Look more closely at the temple of the feathered serpent, and you notice something strange, something unsettling. It does not merely rest on the land, it aligns with the universe. Nothing about Teotihuacan's layout was left to chance. The whole city was set along exact cosmic axes. Its central avenue of the dead runs at a 15-degree tilt off true north, no error, but a deliberate offset, quite possibly meant to match the setting of the Pleiades or the sun on particular ritual days. The temple of the feathered serpent sits squarely along this avenue, fixed into a grand celestial plan. But why? What were they striving to align with? Archaeologists and archaeoastronomers have argued over it for decades. Some propose the temple lines up with the equinox sunrise. Others contend it tracks Venus, the planet most sacred to Mesoamerican peoples, so often linked with war, sacrifice, and rebirth. When Venus rose or set, wars were declared, offerings prepared, and temples brought to life with ritual fire. Even the building's proportions look intentional. The number 7, matching the count of visible heavenly bodies, recurs across its stepped platforms. There is symmetry here, rhythm, and a remarkable command of both earthly arithmetic and cosmic cycles. And below ground, further clues. In 2003, archaeologists uncovered a tunnel beneath the temple, not a rough shaft but a purposefully built underground world. Its walls had once been coated in powdered pyrite, a glittering mineral that would have caught the light like starlight. Together with pools of mercury and mica-lined surfaces, the tunnel seems designed to reproduce the cosmos itself. To pass through it would be to travel the Milky Way, a symbolic descent into the underworld, or perhaps toward rebirth. Was this temple not only a place of sacrifice but a cosmic machine, a gateway joining earth, sky, and the realm of spirits? Some scholars believe Teotihuacan saw time as a circle rather than a line. Every rite, every structure, every sacrifice was not a single event, but part of an endless cycle, death giving way to renewal, sacrifice powering rebirth. The temple's alignments may have helped forecast the movements of the heavens, coordinate the harvest, and, more crucially, mark the moments to offer blood. The Temple of the Feathered Serpent was not simply watching the stars, it was trying to speak with them. The Temple of the Feathered Serpent was more than a spiritual landmark. It was a political weapon. Its very form was meant to overwhelm, to intimidate, to remind every onlooker, local or foreign, who truly held the reins of power in Teotihuacan. Picture standing in its shadow 800 years ago. As a visitor from some smaller city-state, you would enter along the Avenue of the Dead, already struck by the sheer size of Teotihuacan. But reaching the Temple of the Feathered Serpent, you would stop cold. The serpent heads glare down, fangs bared. Jaguar emblems snarl out of the stone. The plaza before it once held enormous crowds, gathered not only to celebrate, but to witness public ritual. You might even see a sacrifice performed. The ruling class of Teotihuacan understood something essential. Fear is power. And nothing stirs, fear like the wrath of the gods. By staging ritual executions in the full light of day, framed by cosmic symbols and images of death, they delivered an unmistakable message. The gods are with us, and we do not shrink from feeding them. Yet none of this was chaos. It was theatre. Priests in feathered headdresses and masks of obsidian would chant and dance and let blood flow, converting cosmic myth into a kind of political performance. The point was never simply to satisfy the gods. It was to remind everyone watching that the city's rulers held a direct line to the divine. They, and only they, could pry open the heavens, or call down rain, shield the people, or crush their enemies. The buildings themselves carried the same message. From the temple's upper terraces, the leaders gazed down across the plaza, masters not only of the story, but of the very ground on which it was told. The crowd looked upward at the gods, at the rulers, at the sacrifices, and understood exactly where it stood. And for outsiders, Teotihuacan had no need to conquer with swords. It conquered with symbols. Visiting dignitaries returned home carrying stories of wonder and dread, of feathered serpents, of avenues that seemed to run on forever, of blood rites that turned the sky red. In a world where gods govern through fear, Teotihuacan cast itself as their chosen voice, and the Temple of the Feathered Serpent spoke loudest of all. At its height, Teotihuacan was the pulse of Mesoamerica, a city of fire and stone, of gods and blood, one that seemed built to outlast time itself. But somewhere around the year 550 CE, something shifted, something broke. And the quiet that followed was every bit as unsettling as the temple's carved serpent heads. The fall was not sudden and dramatic. It came slowly, and then all at once. The cracks had shown for decades, small signs that the cosmic machine was losing its grip. The evidence points to a long stretch of drought, failing harvests, and mounting unrest. The pillars that had held the city up, its concentrated power, its religious grip, its promise of cosmic order, began to buckle under the strain. And then came the fire. Archaeologists have found broad layers of burning across the elite compounds, the temples, the administrative halls, and clear marks of violent destruction at the Temple of the Feathered Serpent itself. What puzzles them is that the poorer residential districts were largely spared. This was no invasion from outside. This was an uprising, a rebellion, and very likely one from within. The same people who had once watched the sacrifices in awe may have finally turned on their priest kings. The temple that had stood for divine authority was looted. Its sculptures were smashed, its sacred chambers defiled, and fires were set among them. The temple no longer spoke, and still the mystery only grew, because as the city faded, its memory refused to. Centuries afterward, the Aztecs came into the Valley of Mexico and found the ruins waiting for them. They were awestruck. They were certain that gods had raised this place, and so they called it Teotihuacan, the place where the gods were born. They wove their own legends around the pyramids and treated the ground as holy, though they had no notion of who had actually built it. To them, the temple was no ruin at all. It was proof of a divine truth. And there lies the irony. The mightiest city of its age, founded on cosmic order and blood, disappeared without a single written word, without any final account, leaving behind only stone and unanswered questions. The gods, it seemed, had fallen silent. For more than 1,000 years the temple lay buried under dust and volcanic ash and quiet. The locals kept their distance. Farmers worked the fields around it, and the wider world simply forgot. Then the modern age of archaeology arrived and began to pry loose the secrets held in its heart. In the early 20th century, Mexican archaeologists started to dig at Teotihuacan, and what emerged astonished them: a flawlessly engineered city far older than the Aztecs. But it was only in the 1980s and 2000s that the temple gave up its most private and most chilling secrets. One of the most striking finds came in 2011, when researchers opened a sealed tunnel beneath the Temple of the Feathered Serpent. It had been shut deliberately nearly 1800 years earlier, as though to keep anyone from ever setting foot inside again. After years of careful work, they uncovered a kind of cosmic corridor, a symbolic underworld lined with pyrite to imitate a starlit sky, with pools of liquid mercury and thousands of ritual offerings, jade figures, rubber balls, obsidian blades, even carved wooden masks. It felt less like a tomb than a message. Why go to such extraordinary lengths? What were the builders trying to protect or to conceal? Some scholars think the tunnel served in initiation rites. Others believe it stood for the making of the world, a mythic womb where the gods were born, where kings were forged, where the balance between humanity and the cosmos was worked out. The mercury, long assumed to be merely poison, may have stood for water or for the shimmering boundary between worlds. And running through all these glittering pieces was a single persistent murmur. The feathered serpent still lingered, not only as a myth, but as a presence, in the murals, in the carvings, in the very geometry of the temple. It had never truly gone. It had wound itself inward, deep into the bones of the city, waiting to be found again. And with every dig, every unearthed jawbone or golden ornament, we edge a little nearer to its meaning, one written not in words but in stone, in sacrifice, in shadow. Modern science has handed us X-rays, drones, ground-penetrating radar. And yet, for all our instruments, one thing holds. The temple still keeps secrets. Today, the Temple of the Feathered Serpent stands as a haunting monument, not only to a vanished civilization, but to a whole way of thinking, one that bound power, cosmos, and death into a single unbreakable system. Tourists take their photographs. Children dash past the stone serpent heads, but the earth beneath their feet is soaked in 1,000 untold stories and more than 200 known human sacrifices. And still, the temple endures. Its legacy is not merely architectural. It is psychological, spiritual, cultural. The feathered serpent, that contradictory god of sky and earth, kept changing. He was taken up by the Toltecs and later reborn among the Aztecs as Quetzalcoatl, where his story softened into something gentler, the giver of knowledge, the god who wept for humankind, the one who swore he would return. This retelling of the serpent god shows how myths do not die, they transform. Even in modern Mexico, his echoes carry on, in art, in murals, in literature, in the sense of national identity. The temple's likeness has appeared on coins, on stamps, even on government buildings. It has become an emblem of mystery, of pre-Columbian genius, and of the wild spiritual current that once ran through Mesoamerica. But there is another legacy, harder to see and less comfortable. The temple forces us to reckon with the cost of belief. It puts hard questions to us. How far will people go to feel joined to the divine? What happens when power and religion blur into one another? Can beauty and terror share the same ground? In a real sense, the temple is not simply a historical site. It is a mirror, a reflection of ourselves, of our fascination with life beyond death, our hunger for meaning, our gift for raising monuments of breathtaking beauty and then staining them with blood. It teaches that greatness always trails its shadows, that civilizations can climb to impossible heights while burying their darkest truths beneath the paving stones. Perhaps that is why we keep coming back, not only to look, but to understand. Because somewhere deep down we sense the serpent is still watching, not to strike, but to remind us of what we once were and what we might still become. Before we spoke in words, we spoke in rhythm. Tens of thousands of years ago, long before writing was invented, before language itself had emerged, early humans began making something you could only call sound with intention. Not speech, not melody, but rhythm. A hand slapping hollow bark, a stick striking stone, a foot stamping the ground in time. Somewhere in that ancient repetition, something remarkable took shape, the first drumbeat. Nobody called it music, nobody called it anything. But it felt like something, like communication, like movement, like emotion given form. Anthropologists have turned up traces of primitive percussion instruments reaching back more than 30,000 years. They were most likely made from whatever nature offered: tree trunks, hollowed gourds, stretched animal hides. Nothing elaborate, nothing that would survive. Yet these crude drums were no toys, no idle pastime. Picture a tribe spread thin across a dense forest. One beat from a far-off drum, and the others knew that danger was near, or a feast had begun, or the gods were listening. The oldest drums were extensions of the body itself, a heartbeat carried outward, a pulse you could feel clear across a valley. Drumming was never something you merely watched or listened to. It was something you did together, around fires beneath the stars, in caves where the echoes set the very air trembling. Those ancient rhythms became a language of feeling, joy, grief, warning, hope, spoken not in syllables or signs but in patterned sound. Before the first flute was carved, before anyone dreamed of strings, the drum was already alive, anchoring us in time, giving shape to ritual, binding individuals into tribes. In that way, the drum became humanity's first instrument, and perhaps its first sense of shared identity. Wherever people lived on this earth, they made something to strike, something to beat, something to mark the moment, because even when we had no words, we had rhythm, and that rhythm was everything. In the cradle of early human life, drums were far more than instruments. They were sacred voices. Every tribe, every culture, every corner of the world grew its own rhythm. Yet the purpose was almost the same everywhere, to reach the unseen. In Africa, home to some of the earliest drums we know of, rhythm was woven tightly into life, death, and ancestry. The djembe, carved from a single tree and wrapped in goatskin, was believed to hold three spirits: the spirit of the tree it was cut from, the animal whose hide gave it voice, and the craftsman who brought it to life. Played in a circle, the djembe did not merely accompany the ritual. It was the ritual. Then there were the talking drums, able to imitate human speech through shifts in pitch and tone. In West Africa, these drums carried messages across great distances, passing along news, warnings, births and deaths from one village to the next. Long before the telephone existed, people were already drumming their words across the land. An ocean away, Native American tribes treated the drum as a living being. It was the heartbeat of Mother Earth, sounded in ceremonies to honor ancestors, to call for healing, or to guide the spirits of the dead. The great powwow drum, struck by a ring of drummers, was both a musical and a spiritual engine, a shared pulse that brought people into line with nature and spirit. In Australia, Aboriginal people used clapsticks and stamping rhythms in the sacred dream time, the mythic age of creation. In the Arctic, Inuit shamans beat frame drums to slip into trance, seeking visions or reaching out to spirits through the long, dark winters. These were not performances. They were acts of survival, of healing, of storytelling and connection. To drum was to remember. To drum was to belong. And it was always shared. Drums drew people together into sacred circles, bringing their hearts and their intentions into a single beat. There was no sheet music and no stage, only bodies in motion, hands falling on skin, and something inward being stirred, all of it bound together by rhythm. It made no difference where on the planet you happened to be standing. If a drum reached you from somewhere far off, you understood that something sacred was underway, something that plain words could never quite hold. From sacred circles to blood-soaked battlefields, the drum has always had a voice, sometimes offering comfort, sometimes issuing commands. As human communities grew into kingdoms and empires, the drum was reshaped into an instrument of dominance, a device for keeping order, and a weapon meant to frighten. The first armies had no radios and no megaphones. What they had were drums. In ancient China, enormous war drums were struck to move troops across sprawling ground. A single deep boom let a commander call for a charge, a retreat, or a move around the enemy's flank. These drums were not merely loud, they were tactical. Every rhythm carried a specific meaning, and seasoned soldiers had learned to pick it out even amid the confusion of combat. In Mesopotamia, temple drums announced rulers and gathered the people, but when war came they rolled out across the city walls, unnerving enemies with a low, unbroken thunder. This was not simply percussion, it was psychological warfare. When the Romans marched, they carried the tympanum, a frame drum used in processions and by cults such as that of Cybele. It was never a battlefield instrument in the way that horns and standards were, yet it held symbolic weight, a sound that stood for empire, discipline, and order. But no army handled drums quite the way the Ottomans did. Their meta bands, the earliest known military orchestras, loosed a crushing tempest of drums, cymbals, and horns before a battle began. The ceaseless hammering of the kers, giant kettle drums, and the davul, double-headed bass drums, drove terror into the ranks facing them. Some European accounts tell of soldiers frozen in fear before the Ottomans had even come into view, paralyzed by nothing but sound. Drums enforced authority away from the fighting as well. In royal courts across Asia, Africa, and Europe, drum ensembles heralded arrivals, marked coronations, and lent gravity to political ceremony. To strike a drum was to announce that power was in the room. Even enslaved people in the Americas turned drums into instruments of resistance. On the plantations, rhythmic messages kept culture breathing and helped coordinate secret uprisings. The drum, even under the heaviest oppression, would not be quieted. So whether it spoke of divine right, of military discipline, or of raw fear, the drum always carried a message. This is who rules. This is who marches. This is the rhythm of power. As civilizations spread across the continents, their rhythms spread with them, changing in shape, in purpose, and in outlook. In the East, drums became instruments of precision, of spirit, of ceremony. In the West, they leaned toward military strength and, in time, orchestral grandeur. Two worlds, two paths, a single heartbeat. In India, the drum grew into a sacred vessel for divine language. The tabla, with its clear tones and supple grace, belonged to classical music and to devotional performance. But it was far more than accompaniment. It was conversation. Every stroke had its own name, its own meaning, its own syllabic identity. Indian drumming was not simply percussive. It was spoken poetry, trained across decades. Its drummers moved with martial precision, their stances rooted like those of warriors. At festivals, the booming taiko rolled through mountain valleys, believed to scatter evil spirits and coax the gods down to earth. Meanwhile, in Indonesia, the kendang led the hypnotic currents of the gamelan orchestra, steering dancers and players through sacred temple rites. These rhythms were layered, interlocked, and celestial, a sonic mirror of cosmic harmony. Across the world, in Europe, the drum followed a different story. Through the medieval period, it was largely practical, signaling soldiers, keeping time, holding discipline in place. Not until the Renaissance and Baroque eras did drums begin to enter formal music, and even then they were held to the background, thundering quietly beneath royal fanfare or echoing in grand cathedrals. In that split you can see two philosophies. The East treated rhythm as art and spirit, something bound to breath, to chant, to meditation. The West treated it as structure and force, a means to rally, to march, and to measure. Yet both grasped the drum's essential power, to shape time, to set the pace, to lift up ritual, to join people together in ways that reach past language. East or West, sacred or strategic, the drum stayed at the center, always listening, always speaking. From mountaintop temples to jungle clearings, from desert fires to candlelit cathedrals, drums have always held a place where the human meets the divine. Long before organized religion took hold, rhythm was already a sacred tongue, a way to pray, to summon, to rise beyond oneself. In Africa, drums were not simply instruments, they were spiritual beings. In Yoruba tradition, for instance, the bata drum spoke with the orishas, the gods, and the spirits of the ancestors. The drummers were not entertainers, they were priests. The rhythms they played were prayers written in beats, inviting the gods to descend and dance among the living. Every pattern had a purpose. Every stroke pointed a direction. In Hinduism, the drum appears even in the hands of the gods themselves. The deity Shiva, in his form as Nataraja, performs the cosmic dance of creation and destruction, holding a small hourglass-shaped drum, the damaru. Its beat stands for the pulse of the universe. From silence into sound, from emptiness into form, the drum is a divine heartbeat. In Buddhism, the ritual frame drum accompanies monastic chant and meditation. Its slow, gentle strikes guide the breath and steady awareness, working like a metronome for the soul. It is neither loud nor forceful. It simply calls the practitioner back again and again to the present moment. Across the Americas, indigenous peoples used drums in vision quests, in sweat lodges, and in ceremonies of healing. The beat stayed constant and even, echoing the rhythm of the womb, helping participants slip into trance or reach toward the spirits of their ancestors. In those spaces, the drum did not merely accompany the prayer, it was the prayer. Even within Christianity, where rhythm was often held back, the drum still found a sacred role. In gospel tradition, especially in African American churches, drums became a vehicle for praise and power, a heartbeat beneath voices raised in devotion, a reminder of struggle, of hope, and of a divine rhythm running through every life. Whatever the faith, whatever the ritual, whatever God was called upon, the drum was there, not as decoration, but as a vessel for energy, for intention, and for the mysteries we cannot put into words. Because when words give out in worship, rhythm remains, and the divine is always listening. For thousands of years, the drum was a solitary thing. One body, one sound, one purpose. But in the middle of the industrial age, something revolutionary took place. In factories, in the streets, and in music halls, percussion was rethought. And by the early 20th century, a scattering of separate drums across a stage was pulled together into something entirely new, the drum kit. It was born out of necessity. In the late 1800s, military and theatre bands needed several percussionists, one for the bass drum, one for the snare, others for cymbals and wood blocks. But space was cramped and budgets were tighter still, so drummers began folding these instruments into a single playable arrangement. By 1909, the first bass drum pedal had been patented. Now, one drummer could strike that massive drum with a foot, leaving both hands free for more. The idea spread quickly. Over the following decades, drummers added hi-hats, toms, cowbells, and ride cymbals, building a setup that could stand in for a whole percussion section from a single seat. What emerged was more than a tool. It was a drummer's throne. And then came jazz. In the smoky clubs and underground dance halls of New Orleans and Chicago, the drum kit burst into life. Jazz drummers did not merely keep time, they played the kit like a voice, full of syncopation, swing, and feeling. Legends such as Gene Krupa and Buddy Rich turned the drum set into a lead instrument. Rhythm became storytelling. As jazz gave way to rock, the drum kit grew louder, heavier, more forceful. The 1960s and 70s saw kits expand with rows of toms, splash cymbals, and double bass pedals. Drummers like John Bonham, Neil Peart, and Keith Moon pushed the limits of stamina and invention. The drummer was no longer at the back. He or she had become the engine. Today, the drum kit is a global fixture, found in gospel churches and on EDM stages, in punk garages and on world tours. And even as digital kits and drum machines have risen, the physical reality of a live kit, the sticks, the skins, the sweat, remains impossible to replace. It is a symbol of modern rhythm, a fusion of centuries, where tradition meets invention and where a single drummer can speak with 10 voices at once. The world beats in thousands of dialects, and so do its drums. From continent to continent, from culture to culture, the drum has taken on countless forms, each with its own identity, sound, and purpose. These are not merely instruments. They are cultural signatures, made from local materials, shaped by local hands, and steeped in the rhythms of ordinary life. In West Africa, the djembe remains the heartbeat of the community gathering. It speaks in sharp slaps and deep bass tones, built for storytelling and for spontaneous exchange. Beside it, the dunan lays down the foundational pulse, an anchor for everyone else to dance around. In Africa, a drum ensemble is not just music, it is a conversation among spirits, ancestors, and the living. In the Middle East, the darbuka, a goblet-shaped drum made of clay or metal, delivers crisp, quick rhythms central to belly dance and to classical Arabic music. Its voice is sharp and articulate, asking precision of the player and movement of the listener. Across the Caribbean and Latin America, drums tell another story, one shaped by resilience and by blending. The conga, the bongo, and the timbales carry the mix of African, indigenous, and Spanish influence. In Cuba, the sacred bata drums serve the rituals of Santeria, each drum speaking a divine language tied to the orishas. In Brazil, the thunder of the surdo and the wail of the cuica drive samba through the streets, pouring joy into protest, prayer, and carnival alike. In India, the mridangam and the tabla rule South and North Indian classical music respectively. These drums are so exact that they are tuned to pitch, blurring the border between rhythm and melody. Every finger's motion counts. Every stroke carries centuries behind it. Then there is the frame drum, among the oldest in all of human history, turning up in everything from the Persian daf to the Irish bodhran, from shamanic tools to folk ensembles. Played with fingertips, mallets, or brushes, it is proof that even simplicity can be sacred. What ties them all together? Purpose. Whether they guide dance, healing, ritual, or revolution, each drum reflects the soul of its people. Their rhythms hold geography, history, and identity. The global family of drums is not only diverse, It is universal, because no matter where you travel, the earth still echoes with rhythm. As the 20th century wound down, the sound of drums began to shift, not in rhythm but in texture. The physical gave ground to the programmable. The sweating palms, the wooden sticks, the calloused fingertips all began to share room with circuits, pads and software. The age of the digital drum had arrived. It started in the 1970s with primitive drum machines, early devices such as the Rhythmicon and the Roland CR78 that leaned on analog circuits to fake basic beats. At first they sounded robotic, even clumsy. But musicians heard something else in them: consistency, control, and endless possibility. In 1980, Roland released the TR-808, a drum machine so iconic that its deep, booming kick and crisp snare would go on to define whole genres. Hip-hop, techno, electro and trap all owe part of their origin to that synthetic pulse. The point was no longer to imitate acoustic drums, it was to conjure sounds that had never existed before. As digital audio advanced, the instruments advanced with it. Electronic kits such as the Roland V drums let a drummer play with natural motion while triggering thousands of sampled or synthesized tones. A musician could now practice in silence, record without a single microphone, and swap an entire drum kit at the touch of a button. And once computers entered the picture, so did digital audio workstations, the DAWs like Ableton, FL Studio, and Logic. Anyone with a laptop could now assemble intricate rhythms, stacking kicks, snares, hi-hats and sub-bass into towering walls of sound. Finger drumming on MIDI pads grew into an art form all its own. Some worried this meant the end of traditional drumming, that human feel would be swapped for cold, machine precision. It never came to pass. What emerged instead was a blend. Acoustic drummers began wiring triggers and samples into their kits. Producers layered living, human-played drums over programmed beats. The organic and the synthetic settled into a shared groove. Digital drums didn't wipe out the past. They reimagined it. And now we inhabit a world where a single person in a bedroom can build rhythms that once demanded whole orchestras, where ancient patterns from Africa, Asia and the Americas can be sampled, bent and reborn on neon-lit dance floors. The tools have changed, but the aim has not: to move bodies, to shape time, to make silence speak. Across every era, every empire, and every leap in technology, one thing has held constant. The drum remains our oldest and most enduring voice. From ancient fire circles to modern concert halls, from sacred rites to digital dance floors, the drum was never really about music alone. It's about connection to ourselves, to one another, to something larger. It is the heartbeat we all share, and not as a figure of speech, but literally. Even before we are born, curled within the womb, the first rhythm we ever hear is our mother's heart, steady, safe, alive. And once life begins, we spend the rest of it chasing that rhythm. The drum has walked with us through joy and war, through worship and protest. It has marched beside kings and risen alongside rebels. It has echoed through temples and through subway tunnels. It speaks in every tongue because it is itself a tongue, one that slips past thought and addresses the body directly, the bones, the blood. In grief we drum to mourn. In ecstasy we drum to celebrate. And in the quiet stretches in between, we drum to remember who we are. Percussion keeps evolving even now. Handpan players weave new age rhythms on street corners. Indigenous communities guard ancient drumming traditions against every pressure to let them fade. Stadium drummers pull crowds into a single beat. Children hammer pots and pans out of pure instinctive delight. Even artificial intelligence is being taught rhythm. But no algorithm can reproduce the human soul behind a single imperfect beat, because rhythm is not merely counted, it is felt. Perhaps that is why the drum has outlasted empires and passing trends. Deep down, we all crave the anchor of time, the shared pulse that reminds us we are here, together, now. However advanced our instruments grow, however virtual our experiences become, there will always be something profoundly grounding about skin on skin, stick on hide, hand on wood. A beat, a breath, a beginning. The drum is no relic of a vanished age. It is a reminder that we were always meant to move in rhythm, to listen, to feel, to play. And for as long as humanity lasts, the drum will never fall silent. Before Manhattan became a forest of glass and steel, it was an island of shadows, though the shadows fell not from towers, but from church steeples and sloping rooftops. In the early 1800s, the skyline barely existed at all. The city huddled at the southern tip of the island, a crowded tangle of brick townhouses, timber-framed shops, and hard-packed dirt roads. Buildings seldom rose beyond 5 or 6 stories, and not for any lack of ambition. Gravity had the last word. The taller a structure grew, the more weight it had to bear, and with stone and brick, height came dearly. The lower walls had to be thickened to hold up everything above, which stole interior space and demanded massive foundations. To build high was to build heavy, and heavy simply didn't pay. So the city spread sideways instead, marching northward along a grid laid out in 1811, one of the boldest urban plans of its age. Yet beneath that grid, under the layers of cobblestone and soil, Manhattan hid a secret advantage: bedrock. Deep, dense, and immovable. The granite spine running under the island would one day carry some of the tallest buildings in human history. For now, though, it lay silent, untouched, waiting. Life in early Manhattan was loud but earthbound. Trade churned in the harbor, ships crowded the piers, and horses clattered down narrow lanes. The economy expanded, immigration surged, and the island brimmed with energy, but still the city clung to the ground, and the sky went untouched. The only true vertical gestures were churches, and none more prominent than Trinity Church. Its spire, finished in 1846, climbed over 280 feet, and for a while it was the tallest thing in New York. Even so, it was more emblem than skyline. What no one yet grasped was that the city's future height would be shaped not by stone or wood, but by iron, steel, and imagination, and that it would not be bound to the earth. It would rise far beyond it. Manhattan was not yet a city of towers, but the stage was being set. The island was ready, the dream was taking form, and soon the skyline would begin to stretch. For centuries, gravity was Manhattan's chief architect. It kept buildings low, cities flat, and human ambition roped to the ground. But in the mid-19th century, 2 breakthroughs would tear the skyline wide open. One raised people, the other raised buildings. The first arrived in 1852, when an inventor named Elisha Otis revealed his revolutionary safety elevator. In a theatrical demonstration at the New York Crystal Palace, Otis stood on a platform hoisted high above the crowd and ordered the rope to be cut. The onlookers gasped, but the platform held. A hidden mechanism locked the lift in place. In that single breathtaking instant, Otis rewrote the rules of height. Until then, the upper floors of a building were the cheapest. since no one relished the climb. Once elevators became safe and practical, though, those top floors turned into prime real estate, prized for their light, air, and prestige. The vertical city suddenly made financial sense. But moving people upward wasn't enough on its own. Buildings still leaned on load-bearing walls, which had to grow thicker and heavier the higher they reached. That is where the second innovation entered, the steel skeleton. Through the 1880s and 1890s, engineers began framing buildings in steel, so that exterior walls could become thin curtains rather than bulky structural supports. This approach, known as steel frame construction, handed architects a new freedom to build as high as the frame would allow. Suddenly, height was no longer a gamble. It was a strategy. The technology had come. The materials were on hand. And Manhattan, with its solid bedrock and booming economy, was the ideal canvas. The island's cramped geography pushed builders to think upward, and its role as a financial capital meant everyone, from banks to newspapers, wanted their name written across the clouds. The elevator made the sky reachable. The steel skeleton made it buildable. Together they didn't merely alter architecture. They redefined what a city could be. Now the race would begin, not outward, but upward. By the close of the 19th century, New York was no longer satisfied to sprawl. It wanted to soar. The ground was full, the streets were packed, and the only direction left was up. With steel frame construction and the elevator both established, Manhattan turned into a proving ground, and the skyline into a battlefield for ambition. The opening shots came in the 1890s. In 1890, the New York World Building, home to Joseph Pulitzer's newspaper empire, rose 20 stories above Park Row and became the tallest office building in the world, briefly. Refusing to be outdone, the Park Row building seized the title in 1819, standing 3099. Every new tower was a declaration, not merely of wealth, but of vision. To build higher was to announce that you were the future. Soon the skyline was sprouting steel giants. The Singer Building, completed in 1908, reached 612 feet, becoming the tallest building in the world and the first to overtake the spire of Trinity Church, which had held the record for more than 50 years. But even that would not last. In 1913, the Woolworth Building took the crown. Designed by architect Cass Gilbert and paid for in cash by retail magnate Frank W. Woolworth, it climbed 792 feet across 55 stories in a soaring display of neo-Gothic beauty. Nicknamed the Cathedral of Commerce, the Woolworth was not simply tall. It was majestic, an architectural sermon about America's rise as a modern power. Yet this was never only architectural rivalry. It was branding warfare. Corporations and institutions fought for the tallest, most distinctive buildings, towers that would carve their names into the sky. Every new height made a headline. Every silhouette became a symbol. The skyscraper turned into the ultimate billboard, permanent, imposing, impossible to overlook. And, beneath it all, the rhythm of progress pounded on without rest. Steam shovels chewed foundations out of granite. Riveters drove steel day and night. Immigrants and ironworkers balanced on beams hundreds of feet in the air with no harnesses, only grit and nerve. The skyline was no longer a theory. It was real, and it was rising. As the 1920s roared through Manhattan, the skyline began to dance rather than merely climb. This was the age of Art Deco, when architecture concerned itself not only with height, but with style. The Jazz Age poured elegance into steel and stone, and New York's buildings became icons of motion, light, and energy. Commissioned by automobile magnate Walter Chrysler, the tower was more than a monument to corporate triumph. It was a symphony in design. Its stainless steel spire, assembled in secret and raised into place overnight, glittered in the sun like a crown. Ornamental eagles, modelled on hood ornaments, jutted from the corners like sentinels of the future. With its curves, chevrons, and machine-age detailing, the Chrysler Building didn't just scrape the sky, it seduced it. But the race was not finished. Only a few blocks away, another titan was climbing. The Empire State Building, completed in 1931 in the depths of the Great Depression, surged to 1,250 feet, snatching the title from Chrysler and keeping it for nearly 40 years. Raised in a mere 410 days by thousands of workers laboring through wind, snow, and steel dust, the Empire State was more than a building. It was a message: New York endures. While much of the nation suffered, Manhattan pressed upward, and its buildings mirrored the era's split personality, elegant yet aggressive, hopeful yet fiercely competitive. The Art Deco style caught all the contradictions of the moment, geometric but graceful, modern yet steeped in myth. These towers were never just functional. They were sculpted, glowing at night like beacons of possibility. Yet underneath all that glamour lay a deeper intention. These towers were commissioned by barons and moguls who were after something more lasting than money. They craved legacy, a fixed spot in the skyline and in the record of history. As the 1930s drew to a close, Manhattan's outline had settled into its familiar form. The city had grown into far more than a hub of finance. It had become a cathedral of ambition, a skyline that did not murmur about progress, but proclaimed it aloud. When the Second World War ended, Manhattan's profile entered a fresh chapter, one that traded ornament for something more corporate. The grace of Art Deco surrendered to glass, steel, and unbroken straight lines. America now stood as a global superpower, and New York served as the front office of that empire. The skyline shifted to match, no longer crowned with decorative spires but crowded with monuments to efficiency. In 1952, the United Nations headquarters climbed skyward along the East River, a bold, boxy slab of glass framed by low marble wings. It signaled a change in mood, one that was global, diplomatic, and forward-looking. It was not merely a building. It was an architectural declaration about world order in the atomic age, and it laid the groundwork for everything that came after. Then arrived Lever House in 1952 and the Seagram Building in 1958, both landmark examples of the international style. With their curtain walls of mirrored glass and their steel frames, these towers were minimalist by intention, cleared of ornament, emptied of sentiment. They resembled neither cathedrals nor castles. They looked like machines, exact, modern, and coldly practical. The Seagram Building, designed by Ludwig Mies van der Rohe, proved especially influential. Its bronze-tinted glass, its even grid, and its open plaza introduced a new way of occupying the city, one meant not to dazzle with flourishes, but to radiate order, discipline, and power. This was corporate architecture at its height, cold, elegant, and commanding. As business flourished, so did the skyline. Midtown grew into the center of America's leading corporations, its banks, its media houses, its law firms. These new skyscrapers no longer vied to be the most beautiful. They vied for square footage, for prime location, for a share of the horizon. The soaring spires and gargoyles vanished. In their place stood mirrored monoliths, faceless giants that reflected not only the passing clouds, but the appetites of Wall Street. And still, in their quiet and their plainness, these towers said a great deal. They chronicled a nation fixated on growth, on precision, on the modern. They defined the corporate age and reshaped the look of cities across the world. Yet even amid all that glass and steel, one thing held steady. The skyline remained a symbol, only now it whispered power rather than shouted beauty. By the late 1960s, New York was already a vertical masterwork, but it still had room to dream larger. That dream materialized at the southern tip of Manhattan, where a pair of identical towers were about to reshape the skyline for good. They were audacious, divisive, and unlike anything the world had witnessed. They were the twin towers of the World Trade Center. Envisioned as a center for global commerce, the World Trade Center project fell under the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. The architect Minoru Yamasaki designed the buildings with an uncompromising minimalist vision. Vertical lines, aluminum cladding, no setbacks. Each tower would climb past 1,360 feet, towering over everything built before it. The ambition was not simply architectural. It was ideological, a proclamation of global connection, a new temple raised to capitalism. Construction began in 1966. To clear the ground, an entire district, Radio Row, was razed. The foundations demanded a pioneering method known as the slurry wall, which let engineers dig deep into the soft riverbed while holding back the Hudson. It ranked among the toughest engineering challenges of its day. When they were finished in 1973, the Twin Towers were not embraced by everyone. Some critics dismissed them as sterile or boxy. Others grieved for the ornate towers of earlier decades. But to many, the towers were sheer presence, bold, self-assured, and commanding. They did not dance with the sky the way the Chrysler did. They did not taper like the Empire State. They stood squarely, two pillars of certainty and scale. More than mere buildings, the World Trade Center grew into an international emblem of business, of unity, of American strength. People traveled from across the globe to ride up to the observation decks, to dine at windows on the world, or simply to gaze upward in wonder from the plaza below. For nearly 30 years, the Twin Towers ruled Lower Manhattan. They anchored the skyline and lent it symmetry and weight. And though other cities raised taller structures, none carried the iconic gravity of those two towers standing side by side. The skyline had shifted once more. This time not through ornament or artistry, but through monumental ambition. On the morning of September 11, 2001, the Manhattan skyline was altered forever, not by cranes or by construction, but by violence and smoke. In under 2 hours, the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center crumbled into dust, fire, and mangled steel. Thousands of lives were lost, and the two pillars that had once defined Lower Manhattan were gone. The attack struck at more than people and buildings. It struck at symbols, at everything those towers had represented. Commerce, modernity, freedom, ambition. For decades, the Twin Towers had marked the southern edge of the island. Their clean, monolithic shapes had become visual shorthand for New York itself. Now that skyline was broken. In the days and weeks that followed, Lower Manhattan became a wound, open, smouldering, raw. Where there had been height and light, there was only emptiness. And that emptiness lingered. Photographs of the skyline looked hollow. The familiar outline was fractured, and the ground that had once thrummed with global energy came to be known as Ground Zero. For the first time in a century, Manhattan was not building upward. It was in mourning. The city grieved, yet it also endured. Steelworkers, firefighters, police officers, and volunteers streamed into the site, not to build, but to recover. Rubble was hauled away. Lives were honored. Silence took the place of clanging iron. In a city forever hurrying forward, this was a forced stillness, a long breath held in shared pain. But even in its sorrow, New York did what it had always done. It looked up. The conversations about rebuilding were tangled, emotional, political. What should stand where the towers had stood? Should anything rise at all? Could the skyline be mended without erasing the loss? For years the pit in the ground stayed open, a reminder of what had been and what had been taken. It became sacred ground. And yet, little by little, plans took form. Designs were drawn. The cranes returned, the steel returned. Not to blot out the tragedy, but to build something new beside it. But before a single thing went up, one truth was plain. The skyline was no longer only a symbol of power or ambition. It had become a memorial, a silhouette carved by both triumph and tragedy. And the story was not finished. In the wake of the devastation, a city defined by speed, ambition, and motion came to a halt. Not to give up, but to reimagine. Rebuilding the Manhattan skyline after 9/11 was never simply a question of architecture. It was a question of identity. What would rise in place of the Twin Towers? Could anything? The answers came slowly. In 2003, a design by the architect Daniel Libeskind was chosen for the new World Trade Center site. It was about more than height. It was about healing, memory, and renewal. The plan wove commercial space together with public memorials, parks, transit, and light. It was not a return to what had been. It was a statement of what could be. At the center of it all stood a new tower. One World Trade Center, first known as the Freedom Tower. Rising from the northwest corner of Ground Zero, it would become the tallest building in the Western Hemisphere at 1,076 feet, a figure chosen to echo the year of America's independence. But this was not only about patriotism. It was about defiance, about reaching upward once more in spite of loss. Construction began in 2006, and in 2014, One World Trade Center opened its doors. Sheathed in shimmering glass and standing like a crystal obelisk, it made no attempt to copy the past. It offered something new, reflection, both literal and symbolic. The building shifts with the sky, glowing, darkening, disappearing depending on the light. It is presence without arrogance. Beside it, the 9/11 Memorial opened in 2011. Two deep voids where the original towers had stood, each with an endless waterfall and the names of the fallen cut into bronze. It is not merely part of the skyline, it is part of the city's soul. The new skyline took years to emerge. Other towers rose, 3 WTC, 4 WTC, and 7 WTC, each one sleek, modern, and deliberate. Together, they represent not just a city rebuilt, but a city transformed. New York did not simply replace what it had lost. It evolved. It honored the past while building toward the future. And in doing so, it reminded the world of something deeply American and deeply human. You can knock a city down, but you cannot stop it from rising. Today, the Manhattan skyline is far more than a cluster of buildings. It is a living symbol of ambition, of resilience, of the American dream itself. No other silhouette on Earth carries so much meaning. It is etched into pop culture, into history, into memory. You can sketch it with 5 lines, and people will know it at once. It tells a story of bold engineers and fearless ironworkers, of architects who dreamed up spires that pierced the clouds, and of immigrants who crossed oceans to help raise them. It speaks of risk, of reward, of reinvention, the ceaseless churn of New York itself. It has never been finished, and it never will be. The skyline is alive, always changing. In recent years, it has stretched even higher, though not in Lower Manhattan. This time, the vertical race moved uptown. Along Billionaires Row, ultra-slender residential towers like 432 Park Avenue, Central Park Tower, and 111 West 57th Street now rise like needles above Midtown. These skyscrapers are engineering marvels, pencil-thin, wind-tested, and built for the ultra-wealthy. Critics call them sky-piercing expressions of inequality. Others see them as wonders of modern ambition. Meanwhile, in Hudson Yards, an entirely new neighborhood has taken shape, its gleaming glass towers, public art, and corporate headquarters rising where rail yards once sprawled. The skyline now extends farther west, evolving alongside the city's shifting needs and appetites. But even as it grows, the skyline keeps a firm hold on its past. The Empire State Building still glows through the night. The Chrysler still gleams at sunrise. And One World Trade Center stands solemn and proud. The skyline remembers what came before, even as it reaches toward what is next. More than any monument or statue, it is the skyline that defines New York, not only in its form, but in its meaning. It is a place where humanity dared to build upward again and again through booms and busts, wars and wounds. A city of millions mirrored in steel and glass. It does not merely mark where the city ends, it marks where dreams begin. Because in Manhattan, the sky has never been the limit. It is only the next floor.